Good morning, good day to all of you. Welcome to this series of webinar. This is one of the three that we will have soon. And my name is Mehari. I will be moderating this series, and hopefully we'll have a very good conversation for the next 75 minutes. I hope you have received all the documents that you need. We'll start first with a brief introduction about welcoming remark from Maru, and then we'll proceed to the substantive conversation on the topic that is at hand on the issue of labor migration, a perspectives from various speakers today. And first, let me give this opportunity first to Maru, who will give us a welcoming remark. You have Maru, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mehari. So also good morning from my side to everyone to this first, as Mehari said, of 3 events in this series. We're in fact very happy to welcome so many of you this morning. We are joined by over 150 participants. Our series of 3 events takes place in the context of the MEDAM project, to which EPC is part. We conduct this project jointly with the Kiel Institute for the World Economy and the European University Institute in Florence, and it is supported by the Mercator Foundation. All 3 events in the series, and what is also really a key focus of this MEDAM project, will look at different aspects of EU-Africa cooperation on migration, exploring ways to ensure that that cooperation is effective and also mutually beneficial. After today's discussion, our next events will focus on returns and readmission. This event takes place on the 21st of October, and thereafter on resettlement. That's an event that takes place on the 4th of November. We're very convinced that these conversations are highly timely. The new Pact on Migration and Asylum that was presented 23 September has, of course, emphasized very strongly the central role of cooperation with third countries. At the same time, the EU-AU summit, which was originally scheduled for late October and which was expected to lead to a new EU-Africa strategy and also possibly chart a new direction for cooperation, has been postponed to 2021, but that also enables us, of course, to use this opportunity as a moment to continue reflecting on the best ways forward in that. We very much hope that you will enjoy the discussion today and that we can also welcome you to the next 2 events. And I'll simply leave it at that and pass back over to Mehari so we can dive into the content.
Thank you so much, Maru, for this briefing, welcoming remark. All of you are welcome now officially. Also, I must thank all of you for joining the webinar series. Like I said, and Maru has also emphasized, this is one of the 3 series that we will have, one on readmission, return and readmission on the 21st October. I assume that is a correct date, but we will communicate with you also on that. And also the issue of resettlement on the 4th of November, we will have another one. Today, for the next 75 minutes, like I said, we will focus on labor migration, and especially from Africa to Europe. And we have 4 speakers who will give us their perspective on the place of the labor migration in the new pact, especially with emphasis on that, even if we will draw more or less from previous researches that have been conducted and also in their official dealings by the speakers. Their perspective will be, or their thought will be meant basically to spark conversation, robust conversation. We'll make sure that the speakers do not speak more than 8 minutes each of them, so that we will have sufficient time for the participants to engage with the speakers, and this will become more conversation than a presentation only. So I'll be very strict on the time allotted to each speaker. The first speaker will be Matthias, who is the senior researcher and coordinator of MEDAM project, one of the organizers of this webinar, and which is hosted in Kiel Institute for the World Economy. And he will try to address some important points in his speech, and among them, what research tells us so far on labor migration from Africa to Europe, how the new pact is different from previous partnership, and what role EU has in this pact, and so on, in terms of labor migration. So I hand over to Matthias now to give us the first thoughts to start with. Matthias, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mehari, and good morning, everybody. As Marie already said, when we were planning these webinars, we were looking mostly at the EU-AU summit, which has now had to be postponed. And if we had been doing this only with reference to the summit, we might have asked questions like, what is the potential for triple win labor migration from Africa to Europe? Migration should benefit the migrants, of course. It should benefit those left behind in the countries of origin, and it should also benefit the residents in countries of destination. So triple win migration is what we're looking for. We might also have looked at the role of the regional bodies, European Union, African Union, in fostering freedom of movement within their own regions and maybe across regions. So that is the sort of world that we would have been in only with the EU-AU summit. But now with the new pact for asylum and migration that has been proposed by the European Commission, I suppose we're in a slightly different world. The new pact is not just about cooperation between EU member states and between the European institutions and EU member states, but it's also very crucially about international cooperation in migration management between European Union member states and the European institutions on the one hand, and partner countries, that is countries of origin and transit on the other hand, and of course especially countries in Africa, because that is where a lot of, not all, but a lot of the irregular migration to the European Union is coming to. And the language of the pact is actually quite strong, that there should be joint migration management, and this should be a key element across all the policy areas in the relations between African and European countries, and more generally non-EU countries and the European Union. And joint migration management is not just a buzzword here. It's also very clear in the pact that this should include, crucially, return and readmission of non-EU citizens by their countries of origin, and really full cooperation in that. And this should really be a key element across all policy areas. In fact, it should be a precondition for progress in a lot of other areas, such as visa facilitation, development assistance, that African and European countries and governments may be thinking about. Given what we recently wrote in our annual assessment report on European asylum and migration policies, we have to be a little concerned about this, because a lot of this reads like there will be a deterioration in relations unless African countries cooperate fully on returns and readmission. There is some admission in the pact that, of course, this can be difficult for some partner countries, but the sort of strong language is very much on the side of we have to have more cooperation, and return and readmission is really crucial. And we don't really see a lot that the European Union is offering in return, given that full cooperation in return and readmission is bound to be difficult for many countries of origin. So what we really should be looking for, including in the seminar, I think, is more positive conditionality, in the sense of, well, we understand this is a concern for the European Union, but can we turn this more positive, and what is the European Union willing to do? And in particular, from the point of view of African partners, how important are opportunities, more opportunities for legal labor migration to the EU member states? that may be the key angle from which the pact makes it necessary for us to look at the issue of labor migration going forward in the relations between the EU and African partner countries. Okay, given that there is a concern by the EU about return and readmission, and I guess that is to a large extent legitimate, what are EU member states willing to put on the table to make the outcome overall politically acceptable, not just for EU member states, but for all the countries that are going to be involved, including African countries? So could more legal labor migration, more opportunities for more legal labor migration be the crucial element, the missing link here that would make future relations between African countries and EU member states positive and productive and allow more exchanges rather than less exchanges? Now, in the course of this seminar, we may talk about a lot of detailed issues like how exactly is this going to work? How many workers are there going to be who have the minimum skills to succeed in the European labor market? Will there be a brain drain? How can we make sure that there will not be precarious jobs and exploitative working relationship? What's the right mode of cooperation between governments? What's the involvement of the private sector, say through employment agencies? There may be a lot of detailed issues, but the key angle, I think, is exactly, can we introduce labor migration? Is that really, from the point of view of African stakeholders, a key missing element here? And I've been looking again at the Western Balkans program in Germany, which is basically a special work visa program for citizens of certain Western Balkan countries, which is not so much driven by German labor market need, but it really explicitly is there to be an element in the positive relations and the development of positive relations between Western Balkan countries. It's like a quota of 20,000 work visa every year that has been going on for 5 years, and this may now be extended. This is just being up for discussion. And I'm wondering whether this kind of package, migration that is explicitly there to overcome the impasse in discussions on labor relations that has arisen, whether this kind of program really can be a missing element in our discussions of the pact as we go ahead, and how we can fill that in. And this would be my key question for this webinar, that I would like to sort of listen to people's views as much as talking here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias. These are very interesting points, and also the last question you raised. I assume now we have about 112 attendees, and people will have questions and comments, even from not only from the panelists, but also from the attendees. Participants may have some thoughts, and participants are encouraged to raise their hand later on to ask questions. But I encourage them also to submit their questions in written form in the chat room, so that we will immediately identify and then proceed to the discussion immediately after the finalization of these remarks from the speakers. Now I move on to Amanda, who is the policy officer, the European Center for Development Policy Management, and she has been working on this topic for some time now. And she, hopefully during her remark, she will address the proposals that are included in the new pact, how meaningful and mutually beneficial they are to Africa and Europe, and also looking at the EU-AU summit that is upcoming, that was postponed now. What should be, or what are the priorities, interests and expectations from African governments and citizens about labor migration to Europe, and whether this labor pathway will help to also foster more broader partnership on migration, what it will have, whether it will have impact on that. So Amanda, you have the floor. Like Matthias, you will have about 8 minutes. And I hope you will be also punctual in terms of the use of time, like Matthias. Thank you, Amanda. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mehari. I hope I will be punctual in the use of time because there's a lot to say about labor migration and legal pathways from Africa to the EU. Yeah, I think I'll just pick up from where Matthias left off, looking at the new pact and the opportunities that it presents for cooperation between African and European countries. But I'll look back also a little bit to what exactly has been happening in terms of migration cooperation when we look at legal pathways from African countries to Europe. And this whole discussion about legal pathways and labor mobility is not exactly new. It's been there for a while. And also under the last, the 2015 European Agenda on Migration, there was a focus on creating legal pathways. And again, from the Valletta Summit, there was a focus on creating legal pathways. But what we saw from the evidence was that the amount of resources that were devoted towards creating these legal pathways as opposed to other intervention areas was much less. And so while the rhetoric and the narrative has been there that there is a need to create legal pathways, the actual effort that has been put into creating these pathways has been quite limited. Then if we look at the whole discussions about it, we see that cooperation between the EU and third countries, mostly in Africa, on enhancing legal pathways to migration, in terms of the framework, is mostly couched in non-legally binding arrangements, I like to call them, because it's mostly very flexible MOUs or some joint declarations between states. This is the framework for these kinds of discussions on legal pathways that are relating to labor migration. And we also, I did a little bit of research on this, and I tried to look at it and analyze it from the angle of the individual and the angle of the state. And so when we look at state cooperation, because of these pathways that have been created, we see that there is some sort of increased cooperation between states as a result of these pathways. So in countries where you have pilot projects, like in Morocco or in Nigeria or in Senegal, you see that there is increased cooperation between states on migration issues more broadly. So in terms of readmission, in terms of return. But then at the level of the individual, you see that there are still difficulties in accessing these pathways that have been created. So it raises a question on, okay, so what's the main point on creating these pathways? Is it to increase cooperation between states? Is it like a positive signal that is being sent by European countries to African countries? Or is it actually to create opportunities that can be used for individuals that want to migrate for purposes of employment? Yeah, and so when we look at the theory and evidence of labor migration, we see that there's support for that in the EU, because the businesses are aware that there are labor market shortfalls that need to be filled. But when we look at the angle on foreign relations and power dynamics between European and African countries, we see that these needs of the labor market are being sidelined, and there is a focus on actually migration cooperation that is geared towards restricting entry of some categories of migrants. And into these categories of migrants are not only irregular migrants, but we also see that the opportunities created for low-skilled, and I use the word low-skilled migration loosely, but for low-skilled migrants into the EU are quite limited.
Das habe ich leider nicht ganz verstanden.
When we look at, when we look at the opportunities that are created for high-skilled labor migrants, that you actually have access to visa facilitation. You actually have access to some regulations that are changed at the national level. But then in terms of opportunities created for low-skilled labor migrants, which is what the most majority of the migration from Africa would fall into, then you see that there is a mismatch there in terms of the policies. And of course, what the EU does is to create the framework for these for opportunities for labor migration. However, the national policies have to be the ones that create the actual opportunities that African countries or citizens of African countries can use in accessing the labor market in Europe. And so when we see some examples, IOM has some examples of some projects. There's also the Digital Explorers project, there's a Match project with IOM. And when we see examples of this, we see that it's actually provisions that have been used by EU member states. And so while the general framework is there, if the member states don't create these opportunities, then they cannot be used by African countries. So there is one level of discussion at the level of the EU. There is also another level of discussion that has to be going on at the level of the EU member states. And then if we look more closely now at this discussion, I mean, we basically have two narratives in the EU when we talk about labor, labor migration and legal pathways. Now, one of these narratives links labor mobility to one of these narratives links labor mobility and enhanced legal pathways to facilitating the accessibility of migrants to EU countries. But when we look at the level of what's going on the ground, we actually see that since 2015, there has been a reduction in the number of first-time residence permits that have been issued for migrants from sub-Saharan African countries. We also see that in terms of short-stay visas or visas for students, there also has been a reduction, about a 50% reduction in the number of visas that are issued for migrants from sub-Saharan African countries. So definitely we see a mismatch. So while we see a cooperation at the level of the states by these opportunities that are created, at the individual level, we see that there's actually a constriction of the opportunities that are available for migrants to take use of. The second broad narrative when we look at this legal pathways discussion is that cooperation on legal benefits and migration is linked to reducing irregular migration and implementing effective return policies in collaboration with third countries. And this is where this new pact falls into reinforcing this narrative to say, okay, we cooperate on creating legal pathways to labor migration. However, this is strongly linked to returns, it's strongly linked to readmission, it's strongly linked to cooperation on these issues. And this is where we see that there is some sort of improvement in terms of the cooperation between European and African states. Of course, for me, this raises the question of what transmission mechanisms exist in translating these policies and cooperation between states into the individual level, because at the end of the day, it's to create access for businesses, it's to create access for migrants, access to labor, to labor for businesses and access to the labor market for migrants. And if this transmission mechanisms are missing, then there is a policy mismatch, I think. I think I will leave it here. I think I've probably overshot my 8 minutes, but yeah. Yeah, I think somewhere between the discussions, we will get to the point on the involvement of private sector and also the COVID-19 realities now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I think you did very well on time, and I'm very happy because you have effectively used your time. You have raised the most important questions that this discussion, and also on the way towards the summit, the key issues that has to be addressed in improving, hopefully shaping and influencing the policy making in general during the summit also. So thank you for those points. Now we move on to Sabelo. Head of Labor, Employment, Migration Division, African Union Commission. Good to see you here, and as an official in charge of the most important aspects of this discussion, if you wish, I would like to hear your views, the perspectives of the African Union Commission, also the African view, if you wish, on this new pact that was recently published, and how you see this, whether this is the way it's presented is mutually beneficial, and any whether it will have impact on the expectations, given the expectations from African member states and also the African Union member states, citizens in general, and so on. I think in many ways, Amanda had raised some of the aspects, but the official aspect will be very important, how you at the AU Commission see this new pact and the components related to labor migration from Africa to Europe. Sabelo, you have the floor. I will add 1 minute for you because you are representing the AU Commission.
Thank you very much, Mehari, and good morning to all other distinguished panelists and all the participants in this webinar. We are delighted to have been invited to also contribute to this important conversation. Indeed, labor migration it's a global issue, and therefore I think to pitch it and to discuss it within the context of EU, AU, and the dynamics within with those movements, I think it's an approach that we would support. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, we are working at different levels. Maybe let me start with that we work at a continental level as the AU, but we have another layer or level that is called the RECs, the regional economic communities, which now are the regional multilateral structures. So we try to work closely with the RECs so that the policies that are adopted at a continental level can then trickle down into the regional structures. Then it goes down to the member states, the AU member states. So that gives us some kind of an architecture on how we champion the policy dialogues, the policy conversations, but also the policy formulations at AU. I think it's important for us to be able to mention that yes, labor migration is an important aspect of the labor migration and the mobility and labor governance at African Union Commission. And as such, we've got various frameworks that are now allowing us, or within which we operate. So even the legal pathways, they are governed within these frameworks. One of the main frameworks is the revised migration policy framework for Africa. That is the framework that it's guiding the work that we do, even if we talk about the returns, the reintegration and readmission. That is the framework that is guiding us. But specifically, we have now a continental program that is called JLMP, Joint Labor Migration Program. And in this Joint Labor Migration Program, we work with partners like ILO, we work with IOM, and also the UNECA, which is the UN Economic Commission for Africa. And within this joint labor migration program, that's when we have now various policy propositions. But I think in the context of this this webinar, it will be important for me to be able to bring on the table why do we even have we believe that labor migration as a thematic area should be a priority, because it's a priority of the African Union. It's because based on the studies that have been conducted, it has been noted that the drivers of labor migration, particular labor migration towards Africa and EU corridor, is the youth unemployment and the lack of adequate job creation. These are the root causes. The underemployment, this is one of the root causes. Low quality of jobs driven by demographic pressures. Also wide income inequalities, political conflicts, these are the roots. Also the environmental impact like degradation and droughts. There are many root causes. So you can imagine that if it's not environmental issue, maybe to be a political issue, or the conflicts. If it's not a conflict, maybe it's youth unemployment and inability to create adequate jobs. And all of this then is driving labor migration. So we thought it would be important for us to contextualize our debate to see why do we even have this corridor that even during the COVID-19, it was noticed that actually the labor migration did not stop. Even during the COVID-19, we saw a lot of young people trying to cross to Europe. It's because I think the pushing factors are much more stronger that even COVID-19 could not affect the pushing factors. But then, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, what is it that we are trying to do in order to be able to enhance the legal pathways, particularly between the EU and AU? We have a framework that has already been established, a framework of dialogue, which is called continent-to-continent dialogue. Then it's called MMD, that's migration and mobility dialogue. It is within this dialogue, then the EU and AU, they find each other, they agree on priorities. One of the priorities is of course, the return, also reintegration and admission. That is one of the priorities that we are discussing. And within this priority, we have agreed ourselves, EU and AU, to be able to develop a study to say, let us conduct a study across the continent so that we can see the patterns, so we can see also the driving forces. But the purpose is to come up with a guideline. Then we will later develop the return, the reintegration, and readmission guideline. This is particularly more is going to be an instrumental tool that will assist to build the capacity of the member states to be able to deal with this area. But then, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we also have a framework that is called AU Free Movement of Persons. This is, and there's also, as you are aware, the African Free Trade Area protocol that has been developed, that is starting this year. But within the AFC, the CFTA, which is the free trade area, we know that in the fourth pillar, there are four pillars, which is the free movement of goods, free movement of capital, free movement of services, but the fourth one is free movement of persons. And this is where then we come in because we think the movement of skills within the region, the movement of persons together with the portability of skills is going to be important. But this is also important between the EU and AU, the portability of skills. So we are hoping in this dialogue we'll be able to discuss more concretely the issues of the portability of skills, and this is part of enhancing the legal pathways. Let me wind up, Mehari and colleagues, by also highlighting that within the EU-AU, this MMD, the Migration and Mobility Dialogue, the priorities that we've raised is, yes, the RRR, but the next one, which is important also in the context of the new pact, is the information and intelligence sharing in the context of the trafficking in persons. But the last one also, we're looking at issues of remittances and diaspora engagement, so that, as we indicated earlier on, there's lack of employment. So those who have managed to reach Europe and able to find job, and then we would like to see that the remittances, at least the institutional arrangements and facilitation for remittances to be able to make a difference in Africa, those are in place, and there's diaspora engagement. Let me close by raising some few challenges that we see. There is divergence in approach as the EU. So what we see increasing is that we, as per our policies, the AU is seeing the labor migration as a developmental issue, but increasingly from EU, we have not studied that much the pact, and we are hoping the framework that we have, which is the MMD, the continent to continent, and the migration and mobility dialogue, that's where we'll be able to look at the pact and unpack it and see what are the areas of divergence, what are the areas of convergence. So those are the approaches. Also, the slow implementation of commitments, that is what we also see as a challenge. Particularly the migration pact favor high and medium skilled migrants and not low skilled migrants, which have a significant number, which then are in the significant numbers in terms of the people that are venturing into even perilous routes to want to cross to Europe. Training and certification programs are not mutually recognized. Slow ratification and implementation of international and continental and also regional frameworks on free movement, they are almost non-existent. But building up now to the summit, EU and AU summit, we have a joint, what we call a joint framework, EU-AU framework, as it relates to migration and labor migration. This is what we hope will be able to harmonize our approaches, and the legal pathways is a driving force within this framework. It's a framework that we still have to agree on. But let me stop here, Mehari, and back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabelo. I think I have given you more time so that you can finish the last points were also very, very important, more specific even, and very helpful for our discussion. Thank you so much for reflecting on those critical issues. Now, I want to move immediately to Alexandra, who is the legal and policy officer within the DG Home European Union Commission. She will address also the same way on issues of the existing programs and partnerships with Africa on labor migration or beyond, as example to show us, and the role that EU can play, also EU Commission plays in this regard, given its mandate and so on. Or other issues, you can also reflect on the previous speakers if there are a few points that you would like to raise. You have 8 minutes, Alessandra.
Thank you so much. Hello to everybody, and very impressed with the number of people following. So I think really I try to be very brief to leave time for questions. Of course, what I will try to explain is a bit more what is our approach here, because colleagues Amanda in special and also Matthias have already mentioned some of the actions that are ongoing, supported by us. So what we have on legal migration is a body of legislation which has tried to harmonize the interventions of member states regarding migration to the EU for some categories, because categories of migrants, of third country nationals, because we were not able to convince member states when we received the competence at EU level on migration. We could not convince member states that it would be a good idea, as we thought 20 years ago, to have a general code of immigration to the EU, so with common admission conditions, procedures, and then the protection of rights of migrants, which are our obligations under the treaty, what we can intervene on at EU level via the treaty. So, given that we not convince member states on that, on this immigration code, we have intervened by category of people. And as colleagues said, it is very much true that in what regards labor migration, we could mostly intervene on highly skilled migrants. So we have common rules for the admission of highly skilled migrants, which we call the blue card scheme at EU level. And we have more recently the intercorporate transfer scheme, which I have checked not long ago, and in the end has been quite used by Africans. So that's a good even more than blue card, I think. But it's a good news that that Africans are using the schemes that are available. Then more recently, we finally could convince member states to regulate on an area which is lower skill, which is seasonal work. Which is a directive very much focused on protecting the rights of seasonal workers that come to the EU normally for agriculture, but also for other seasonal activities like tourism. So it was our first intervention in lower skilled people. Then we have, of course, I'm not going into that, but we have frameworks for family members, which is quite generous and bold. We have a framework for recognizing long-term residents of people that come to the EU for more than 5 years and get extra rights. And we have also a recent and we think quite good scheme for student researchers and trainees. So this is our activity. We don't cover with EU law every admission to the EU. However, we should also not lose sight that this does not mean that people do not come to the EU at all skills level. On the contrary, why are we insisting, for instance, on the revision of the blue card is because we don't, compared with what we call our competitors, the US, Canada, Australia, we attract more lower skilled than highly skilled people to the EU. So that's why we are insisting on new instruments for that. So this is for the legal framework. Just here a note, this is a neutral framework, which means that one, it is not national driven. So there are skills that, so anybody that falls or that respects the conditions for admission will be admitted. And second, is not conditional. It's not related to cooperation in other areas of the migration management, as was referred here. And be aware that this is not without debate internally. So for the moment, this is our position, and we hope this continues to be like that. We have in the latest year, and just a very small reference, because Amanda already mentioned this, we have tried to complete this, this legal framework, which is neutral. It's very much based on the initiative of people coming from outside and companies. We have created these instruments to help finance projects, which we call the pilot projects on legal migration, to support member states to propose to partner countries schemes of mobility, normally based, for students, for trainees, but also for workers, in the triple win perspective that Matthias referred. So considering the needs of the labor market in Europe, but also the labor market needs in the partner country, and of course the interest of the person. So for instance, there is a project by Belgium that is based with Morocco, which is based on training people in Morocco, some of them to come to Belgian companies, but most of them to stay in Morocco to fill the needs of the country in the area that it's IT areas that the project is focusing. Just a comment, just a reply before opening for debate. I was just surprised by one point that Amanda mentioned, that it's that legal migration, notably students, cannot call them migrants, but students coming from Africa have been decreasing. That was not at all my idea. The idea I had was that they have been steadily increasing to the EU. And I checked very quickly 3 countries to check that, and it confirmed. I checked Senegal, I checked Nigeria, and I checked Morocco. And for instance, for Morocco, we went in 2015 from 10,000 students to 18,000 in 2018. So unless we are speaking about the impact of COVID, which unfortunately is not only impacting on Africans, or it's impacting on us in here also, it's impacting unfortunately everywhere. I think this may be a bit of a pessimistic perspective on the issue, but I would prefer to leave it for the debate. Any other comments?
Thank you, Alexandra. I think this is good. Now the panelists have raised a few points of divergence, which is good always in this kind of discussion. You don't want to come out agreeing with all. Even with myself, I sometimes say as a researcher, I don't necessarily agree with myself sometimes. What I say in the morning, in the afternoon, if I found out another research output, I change my point of view. So I think now we are done with the presentations, and thank you so much for that. We will move now questions, and since we don't have many questions that were raised, and I don't see people raising their hand, but I see about three questions that were written in the chat room. So I will immediately ask if this participants would like to raise them directly. First one will be, I see also additional one now for, okay, hand raised. Let me see first, let's allow those that have raised the questions earlier. The first one is Abdul Haq, who have raised about health in the question related to health context and the medical sector. Abdul Haq, would you like to raise the question directly or? Okay. Are you there? We can read the question. Maybe Olivia can help us in reading the first question.
Absolutely, I'll be happy to. So the first question, as you raised, Mehari, from Abdelhak Zagrari, is related to COVID. So in the current health context and the shortage of manpower in the medical sector, can we imagine an appeal to African migration to remedy this, or to plan collaboration to finance the on-site training of medical personnel for the European labour market?
Okay, I see second question also from Mary Kidane. And Mary, would you like to raise it directly yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Mary. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I was just curious because when Amanda was speaking about the mismatch between the EU policy and frameworks and their national level, I guess, enforcement, I wanted to ask what possible measures could be actually put in place to, to help these, this implementation process trickle down to the national levels. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a second question. It is the same one question, yeah? Mary, good to hear your voice.
Yes, yeah, same, and good to see you as well. Yeah, I also had a question on the AU. Well, it was in the context of how strong the AU stance is, particularly with this upcoming new pact from the EU on migration and asylum seekers. I just wanted to know, I guess we were, I mean, the topic here is about how to, about the outgoing labor migration, but I was just wondering what the AU and the member states are doing to retain this well-qualified Africans, particularly in terms of improving governance and improving, like creating conducive environments for African citizens, for them to actually stay to prevent brain drain, particularly.
Thank you, Mary. And the third one, I'll raise them all and then we can go to the panelists to respond to them. Lucia, I see you have raised the question. Can you raise the question directly by yourself?
Yes, hi, good morning. I'm Luisa from Caritas Europa, and my question, I mean, to anyone interested in answer, but more particularly to Alexandra. My question is related to the issue of ensuring legal pathways for low-skilled migrants, which has been raised many times here today. So Alexandra mentioned that it has been difficult to convince member states to agree on a EU-level policy to all categories of migrants. So my question is related to how do you think, are you hopeful for next year for the proposal that will be put forward on labor migration in terms of it now incorporating this category of low-skilled migrants? That's something that we are worried about because in the new migration pact, the talent partnership that is introduced there, we think that it risks draining partner countries of its well-educated talent. So we are concerned about how optimistic and ambitious we can be about the proposal of next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucia. And I have a fourth one, and this will be the last before we go to the panelists from Philippe Jussou. Philippe, you have the floor. Are you there, Philippe?
Hello, Doc.
Go ahead, Philippe.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello.
Go ahead, Philippe.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Doc. Thank you very much for this. Thanks to all the panelists. Before I ask my question for me, I would just like to say that when you consider what has been proposed by the European Union in terms of migration engagement with third countries, looking at the legal pathways, I consider it more as being humanitarian focused than economic. And the panelists have just highlighted why I said that, but I'm not going to go into that. Probably that's a discussion for another day. My question is to Alexandra. She said that speaking on the student visa scheme, she made reference to Morocco, Nigeria, and Senegal, and that the figures for Morocco had increased from 10,000 to 18,000. Can she please tell us what was the timeline she referred to, within which timeline, and what are the figures for Senegal and Nigeria within the same timeline? Thank you.
Thank you. I see another one, but I will bring it later. Let's focus on these 4 questions, and I'll start with Alexandra first to respond, and then accordingly we'll go to Sabelo, Amanda, and Matthias. Alexandra, I have the floor.
Thank you. I try to make, and it's a good opportunity for me to speak about the pact, because to stick to the 6 minutes, I did not cover that. So on the points, I would start with Louisa's question on how can the pact change. So what we have proposed in the pact on legal migration was, one, to develop the talent partnerships. That was also a question from Philip. And second, to have a refreshed look at our legal migration framework, which I have mentioned already, notably to look if it is possible to also include admission conditions for lower skilled migrants that are not seasonal workers, because as I mentioned, seasonal workers are already covered by EU level legislation. The first comment I have to say that is on I will leave talent partnerships after, but for the legal framework for lower skilled, the fact that there are no EU rules does not mean that there are no rules. So there are national rules, but those one are not enforceable by the EU courts if there is a problem. And second, they can be restricted via, for instance, quotas or other elements, although even when there is a new scheme, quotas can be applied, but member states have more freedom to act on that. Second comment on lower and medium skilled. When I say there is no EU scheme, it's for the admission of these persons, because for the procedures there are rules that try to ensure that the process of entry into the EU of admission is simplified with a single procedure, that deadlines are respected, and that people have a framework of protection in terms of their of being informed, of having a right to have their cases reviewed, etc., to have access to the courts, etc. So these are things that are regulated at EU level, as the rights that these persons enjoy in the EU that are also regulated at EU level and apply to everybody, to every labor migrant in the EU, and not only those that came in via a EU scheme. So with the pact, because we have been reflecting on this for the last 20 years, and if you are interested, we published a general evaluation of our legal framework, which is called the fitness check. And we concluded that we could work better in this area. And so we will be proposing next year to member states a revision of what we call the single permit directive, which now only covers the issue of the procedures and of the rights of third country nationals in the EU. But we will try also to debate what can be done also for the admission. And here I use the occasion to have so many people listening to me. We have also, with the pact, published a public consultation where people can express their views on this area, among others. So if you are interested on this, please reply to the public consultation. The larger the numbers of replies, the stronger their views are taken by the institutions. So there is a possibility for change, but of course this depends on the negotiation, interinstitutional negotiation as well. On the talent partnerships, what we are trying, and it will be developed in the months to come, is to use the different financing tools of the EU and of member states to propose to specific partner countries a package of measures or different support measures that are in the interest of both sides, and so considering the side also of the partner country, which has covers the aspects that we are now covering with the pilot project, so mobility including, but also capacity building that was referred here, a very big focus on education and vocational training, Also the engagement of the diaspora and the skills recognition that was also referred here, and it's very important for us. So it's something that we are going to build with the instruments that we'll have available with the new financial framework, and very much listening to the partner countries. So here I can understand your issue of draining talent from Africa. This is not at all our intention, of course. And this means what we try is that create the conditions for people that want to stay, can study there, can be trained with quality, etc. So in some member states, in some countries in Africa, this is already the case, so that's not an issue. But in some countries, there is probably a level of upgrade that can be done, as in the EU is the case. So that's something that is ongoing. Try to have more quality education and training is always an objective. And then, of course, there are people that will want to come to the EU. So we will not be able to avoid that. And this links, and this is my last comment, this links to the first question on medical workers from Africa coming to the EU for dealing with COVID. I have to say that we will not I hope for the moment that's not the case. We will not find initiatives at EU level on medical staff, because it has been recognized by WHO that this should not be the case. So that the countries outside Europe need their people. So of course we cannot avoid that people come to you if they have the chance and the will to come. But you will not find a scheme at EU level to promote the arrival of African medical staff to the EU. Just last question, because I just Philip asked me the numbers for Nigeria and for Senegal. So I compared very quickly while Amanda was speaking, 2015 with 2019, because that's the last year we have numbers for. So for Senegal went from 2,100 students in 2015 to 3,950 in 19. In Nigeria, from 2,134 to 3,871. And these numbers are EU27, so does not include the UK, which I think for instance, for Nigeria is an important market for students. Sorry for having been long. I tried to answer all questions. Thanks.
Okay, maybe Amanda, I ask you to also reflect on the questions before I go to Sabelo, and also reflect to the issue of figures that you have, Alexandra has raised issue on the figures from Morocco, the number of visa that were issued, if I am correct. Amanda, I have the floor. You can address also any other question briefly.
Yeah, thank you very much. So if you look at the data from IOM, which looks at the residence permits issued over time from 2011 to 2018, then that's where you find the trend in the reduction of visas for West African, so for migrants from sub-Saharan Africa. So this excludes completely Morocco, which is not Africa. So you see the reduction in the trend of visas that are issued for educational purposes. Also, if you look at the EU data that has to do with visa rejection rates for 2018, then you see that the rejection rates of visas, including visas for short stays and educational purposes. So this is where the data for the students comes from. Also including visas for educational purposes, you find that Nigeria has the highest rejection rate in 2018 of about 49.8%. So that means almost 50% of the people who apply for these visas get a rejection. And then you also see that the same rejection rates of about 40% are there for Ghana and for Senegal. So you see a reduction in the number of the rejection, or an increase, sorry, in the rejection rates for 2018. And then if you look at the numbers from IOM, you see a reduction over time, looking at the trend from 2011 to 2018. So the numbers you're giving now, which include the 2019 numbers, are more recent. But again, generally, there are still not enough opportunities available for students and for low-skilled labor migration from sub-Saharan African countries to the EU. Looking now at the question that has to do with legal pathways for low-skilled migrants and what can be done. I think that one thing that is evident from the COVID-19 pandemic is that states need to take more action to involve different categories of labor migrants in these legal pathway schemes, because one thing that has been evident is that low-skilled migrants have also been considered essential workers, and there are lots of studies about this right now, that low-skilled migrants were also considered essential workers and they were frontline workers during the pandemic. And so it's important that we need to balance out these labor migration schemes to include both highly skilled and low-skilled migrants from countries, from African countries. And so these schemes should have a comprehensive approach, not only focusing on highly skilled migrants, but equally focusing on low-skilled migrants. And this policy mismatch, which is evident in the cooperation between states and the accessibility of individuals to these opportunities, should equally be addressed by looking at the national level at the EU member states and what kinds of schemes can be created in order to take advantage of this broader framework that has been created. And of course, Philip raises a very important point that when you look at the new pact and some of the documents in the new pact, then you realize that actually the legal pathways are focusing more on humanitarian than economic pathways. Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. Sabelo. We can't hear you, Sabelo. You are muted.
I think it's better now.
Go ahead, yes, now.
Thank Prof. Mehari. I think the question is, what is AU doing to improve, migration governance? We are pleased to indicate that currently we are rolling out within our thematic area, the migration governance. We are rolling out a program where we are building the capacity for member states, the capacity for migration governance. So at a national level, we are working and providing technical assistance for the development of the national migration policy frameworks. This also includes, the institutional arrangements within the national level. What is our aim? Our aim is that in the long run, we are going to, labor migration is not something that you're going to stop. It's like water. It's like you can't stop labor migration. It finds its way. You can't stop water. So what we are doing we believe that in the long run we'll be able to enhance the legal pathways, and we'll be able to reduce the irregular migration, because in the irregular migration, then you find a lot of dimensions and dynamics. Some of them could involve human trafficking and smuggling of persons. So we want to reduce irregular migration, but also to enhance the legal pathways. And therefore, when we strengthen the national frameworks, the national labor migration frameworks, labor migration policies, many countries in the study that we conducted, they do not have national migration policy frameworks, national labor migration policy frameworks. So we are also starting at a REC level, the regional economic communities to provide that capacity, the technical assistance, with the hope that it will then cascade down to to the member states, so that then we are able to tackle the irregular migration and to enhance the legal pathways. So this is what we are doing. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthias? Are you unmuted?
No, I was just going to say I have no comments at this point. So if we have time for another round of questions, let's move ahead.
Yes. Thank you. And there is one from Lillian. Lillian Kate, would you like to raise the question yourself? Okay. Maybe Olivia, please read the question.
I'll be happy to. So the question from Liliana Keith. First, she states that even though the EU legal framework is neutral, as the speakers have stated, the issuing of permits is not. And she asks how the panelists would explain and address the following data. And to briefly summarize, she notes that first-time work permits in 2018 showed that citizens from African countries received only 5% of permits in the EU 28, whereas Americans received 13% of permits, with US citizens receiving more permits than from all African countries put together. Whereas lastly, citizens from Central and Eastern Europe were 51% of the total. And that data comes from Eurostat. So the question was, how would panelists explain and address that data?
Good, thank you. And whoever wants to answer to this, maybe Alexandra, we start with you, or
thanks to Liliana. Well, I don't have an answer, but it's probably that the implementation is not, how to say, probably in what regards these permits, the people that are coming from Eastern Europe are able to prove that they have a contract, for instance, then it's more difficult for an African. I'm not saying at all that it's easy for an African to get a work permit to the EU because the conditions are difficult. For him, he needs to find a job, he needs to find, or her or she needs to find somebody that sponsors him coming or her coming to the EU to work. It's not easy. Of course, it's probably easier for somebody from Serbia or from Ukraine, especially Ukraine, because we know they have a scheme with Poland that involves hundreds of thousands of people each year. So, of course, this will draw all the numbers in this already when you look at EU level. But you know that work permits are just a part of the coming in, and I think around a stable 30% of first permits are for family reason. And there, I don't know the numbers, I didn't check that, but probably it's a bit more balanced, how can I say? But so the fact that the rules are neutral does not mean that they are used differently by different people coming from different places. The fact is that if you find in your, and as you know, in your practice for people that practice help in this kind of activities, if you find that the conditions are not being followed, then you have a way to bring the cases to us, as you well know. So in this gets to the court, and we are getting, I don't know, every month probably a decision by the court regarding migration legislation in the EU, and normally favoring the rights of people that come, that are admitted, and people that reside here. So yes, it's not a straightforward answer, but it's what I can give you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Matthias, you want to say anything? Or
Not on this point. I have a couple of observations, though, if I may. I was struck by Sabelo saying that you cannot stop water. It struck me that there's a whole branch of engineering that is trying to get the water where it's needed. No, the metaphor, of course, breaks down because you can direct water, but migrants are people and migrants make their own decisions. So here ends the metaphor. But what I think it has become clear in our discussion is that we really need to address low-skilled and medium-skilled migration from Africa to Europe. And I think it's also very clear that this needs a very systematic approach to training. This is one thing that I think I have learned here. And the other thing that we will probably want to develop as we go ahead discussing these issues is what exactly is the role of bilateral corridors, individual African and European countries cooperating, because they have the same, well, they can agree on certain vocational certificates, etc., and qualification requirements, and make sure that additional skills are what are needed, and what is going to be the role of regional organizations, both the EU and the African Union, in facilitating that. So these would be the things that I learned from listening to this conversation, for which I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Matthias. Sabelo.
Yes, well, I needed to understand from Alexandra if saying they have public consultations. Public consultations on the pact itself. Is this EU or is external? It can include AU, for instance. Question.
Alexandra, you have 1 minute, and then we will close this session soon.
So the public consultation is not on the pact, is on the part of the pact that deals with labor migration, and it's open to everybody everywhere in the world. And we are happy if you participate.
Thank you so much. I think we have exhausted our time. If I am correct, Olivia, we were supposed to finish by 11:15. We are past 2 minutes, thank you. I would like to finish this, close this session with first a reminder that we will have other webinars and that they will be announced and as usual through the usual channel for the 21st October on return and readmission, and also November, the first week of November, I think 4th November on resettlement, and we'll have another chance to interrogate the new pact and its various aspects. And I want to close this session by thanking the participants for attentively attending this meeting, and also raising pertinent questions. Above all, our panelists for giving us some of the key points that we need to ponder as we discuss the new pact, and also leading to the AU-EU partnership summit that is hopefully to be conducted in 2021. And I say goodbye to all of you, unless there is anything from the colleagues, Olivia and others. If there is no any other thing that need to be announced, then I close here. Thank you. Okay, goodbye.